Good morning, everybody. This is Brenda Ermentrout, the coordinator of the Striving Readers and Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant. We're here today for the orientation webinar, so I want to say congratulations to all the teams joining us today, both old and new. We have some friends who've been with us for the Striving Readers Grant, and we're excited about our new team members joining us today. As you hop on, please remember to take a look and see if your microphone is muted so that you're not talking over or rustling papers, so we can all hear what's going on. Thank you and welcome. Jane, you want to advance the slide so Amanda can get started? Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the this webinar, and it's the first of many different contact points that will get you onboarded with this new grant that you've now been awarded. And even those, you know, when Brenda was talking a little bit about those that have been awarded before with the Striving Readers Grant, and then now the new and current Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant awardees. We're really going to try to focus on what is new about this grant. The people that are supporting on this call is Brenda Ermentrout, who welcomed you all in, and she is the project director of both the Striving Readers Grant as well as this Comprehensive Literacy Grant. Ann Ellison, who is the director of academic support and provides the oversight of all of this work. Carolyn Kieber, who is our early learning lead here at the state office, and Jane Grotz, who provides our administrative support in all things literacy grants. My name is Amanda Peterson, and I previously held the oversight of the literacy grants and have just in the last week been moved into and transitioning into a new role as the Director of Educational Equity and Support. So after this phone call and this webinar, I will still be an active team member on this group at the state level in my new role, but that will move back into or remain in the academic support office. So I will take a more of a back seat, but I did meet all of you at the workshop. So thank you for letting me be a part of this continually, and still I can answer questions if needed, but most of your main contact will always be Brenda Ermentrout. One of the things we do have mixed experience and roles within this grant implementation. So understand that this call is still an introductory process, and we are going to be cognizant of that both today and every day as we go. And then so we would really though like everybody to listen to the entire presentation, because this is a new program, and it is going to be some new processes with budget goals and different requirements. So please make sure that you stay on the call and continue to ask questions and be cognizant that there are some adjustments.
Can you back up one? Following the webinar today, we are happy to schedule a post-award phone call with you if your team would like to have a personal conversation with us. Due to the nature of the information that we're sharing today, we're going to present it by talking at you and just going through the slides and sometimes reading them. And we know that from an educational perspective, this is not going to be the most exciting part of your day, and it's not the best way for us to all get to know each other, but we're sharing information today. You're probably going to have questions that are going to come up, and possibly other people will have those same questions. So you're welcome to put those in the chat along the side. If we have time at the end, we'll attempt to answer them. Otherwise, you can expect to hear back from us through either we'll give you a call personally to answer that question, or we'll address it in a memo that we'll send out following this. Also, in that memo, we'll include the slide deck. So if you are nervous about how fast slides are flying by and you're not getting information, we'll send the whole thing to you right after this. And then if you have questions, you can contact Jane Gratz, and she will set up a meeting for your team. You can also email me, and all of our contact information will be listed at the end of this. It will also be presented to you in the memos. So we will reach out with more information. So don't feel like this is as fleeting as it may seem at the moment. All right. What we hope to cover today is planned that we will go over the grant design and goals again to emphasize the important pieces we want to make sure all team members know. We'll cover the assurances that you agreed to when you entered your application for the grant. We'll have quite a bit of information on the budget section and then using the web grant system, and then finishing up with just a few state and federal requirements and our contact information as promised.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Ann Ellefson, and I'm here to share just some general information on the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant and provide you with an overview of our granting system. You will notice on this slide that we had 20 sites, and we will call the entities sites that received awards. So you're going to hear us use the word sites instead of districts. The reason that we are using the word site is because it's really representative.
Dickinson got more.
Bless you.
Fargo got more. Grand
Make
Forks
sure
got more.
that all of your lines are muted, if you would, please.
Got more.
So we use sites because of a birth through 12 approach to comprehensive literacy. So you'll notice on this screen the 20 districts that were awarded for comprehensive literacy, and there were 39 applications that did come in from 39 sites. You'll notice that many of our awards have had a reduction compared to what was asked. We'll talk about that methodology a little bit later, but double, or at least more than double, was the total amount requested compared to what our state received. So we had to make difficult decisions in just funding these 20. There would have been no way that we could have funded all 39 applicants. So several factors, if you could advance the slide, please, whoever's controlling the slides, thank you. Several factors went into how we made the awards that were granted for each of the districts. And the factors that were used were not only the score, so every application received a final score, which got you to the top 20. We knew all top 20 were going to receive funds. So then we set the scores aside and we looked at the total number of students that were being served on a site, the total number of students, and that percentage of kids that were free and reduced lunch. So that's one of our biggest factors, as this grant serves those most at-risk and needy students. Factors that also went into the funding determination was whether the site was a first-time recipient of a literacy reward or if they had previously participated in Striving Readers. And there were some sites that received their original amount requested, and that was based on a variety of factors, but we also looked at if they were similarly situated with other district sizes. So we would look at the total enrollment number of a very large district and how does that compare with other very large districts that are implementing. So you'll notice that the implementation timeline has been adjusted. The North Dakota Department of Public Instruction did receive its official grant award in October 1st. But because of the application timeline and so forth, we are not making awards until April 1st. So your grant award or contract that you'll be receiving will begin April 1st and will go through June 30th, 2021. So in a typical federal title funds type of year, we operate from July to June. Our very first year is going to be from April to June. So it's a little bit bigger than that 12-month timeline. You'll also notice that we've honored the 5-year commitment for these funds. So each year, your site will receive an award. So each of the 5 years, you will receive an award. Noting that year 5 is really our no cost extension year. So prior to the whole COVID pandemic that we have going on in our nation, there was always the no cost extension year that exists with federal funds. And with our Striving Readers grant this year, we are implementing that no cost extension to allow additional time for those funds. We think with a regular no cost extension, as well as the COVID pandemic, having that no cost extension from year 2024 to 2025 should not be of concern. So just so you know, we're allowing it for still a 5-year implementation cycle.
So as you can see, and this is the next few slides are a little bit of a review for those of you who are at the workshop, but it really does balance what Anne was just talking about as we were making the decisions to award who we awarded. We want to remind everybody when we were looking at the different grant activities, and it'll come back into play when Brenda discusses the budget later on, is that the proposed objective in the activities for our state grant, as well as then our subgrantees grants, is to support literacy development for children who have previously been underserved. And what we designed with our state grant to the U.S. Department of Ed was a thorough implementation and coaching support model to address structural changes in comprehensive literacy instruction. And the hope, obviously, is that it will have lasting, sustainable impact on the educators that serve these children. And so if we can go to the next slide, Jane, the goals and objectives and outcomes have not changed. These are what we will continually get you back to, is thinking about those overarching goals on the side, which is improve literacy outcomes for disadvantaged children birth through grade 12. And then obviously really focusing in on the state literacy plan, which is has all of the different pieces that we instructed during the workshop, which is leadership, instruction and intervention, standards alignment, assessment and evaluation, professional development, and last but certainly not least, family and community engagement. Those 6 areas, we believe that if implemented fully and appropriately, then that is all encompassing to create a literacy plan that works for all students. So then what we also look at is the PK through 12 strategic vision outcomes. And obviously we're going to be working on some other outcomes that even are a little bit more SMART in nature, if we're going to talk about SMART goals. But as you can see, those 6 goals of increased students who enter kindergarten prepared to learn, who demonstrate grade 3 reading proficiency, who meet expected learning gains, who engage in the learning, who then graduate choice ready, and then of course all in the realm of reducing disparity in achievement for students in poverty and Native American students. Absolutely, those outcomes go towards what we had talked about with the proposed objective and activities. So this is going to be something that we're going to come back to all the time. We're going to refine as we go, but we just want to make sure that we remind you that as we think of all those activities that you guys wrote about within your grants, and they were some really great and lofty ideas, that we're all, as we made those difficult decisions in the final award, it's always going to center back to some of these goals. And so you're going to hear Brenda absolutely keep focusing the work in with those disadvantaged students and with those literacy goals. And in order to do that, Jean, if you want to advance the next slide, there were some assurances. I'm going to talk about a few of them, and then Brenda's going to continue with that. So the first slide that we're going to talk about, if you'll go to the next one, is the implementation team. And as part of the grant application, obviously you guys, all awardees wrote down a person to meet the needs and to serve in a role like the overall team lead, early learning lead, and then of course representation from special education, elementary, middle school, high school, and then the family and the community. So one thing that I want you guys to consider as you think about those things is that we want you to not think of these as just people that you wrote down on a chart, but these are people that absolutely all need a seat at the table, and they should be part of the training and actively involved in the implementation, no matter the size of your district. And so obviously, as the districts go up in size, then you might have a leadership team, and then it trickles down into other grade level teams or elementary, middle school, high school, early learning. But we really want you to make sure that everybody is involved in the implementation of this grant. And then finally, if you'll go to the next slide, that one thing that we really want you guys to keep in mind is, because this grant is birth through grade 12, is that obviously there should be a project lead and coordinator, somebody that fulfills the roles on the slide, which is communicating with and responding to requests from DPI, collaborating with your REA, which will be your implementation consultant. You'll respond to any federal evaluation requests, participate in all cohort activities, and ensure local implementation team is complete. But one thing that we want to think about with all of that, you're also the communicator. So just because you might be the main contact from DPI or from whomever, we still it is always essential that project lead funnels the information to their teammates. So sometimes we just want to make sure that we can't always include, send out a mailing list to hundreds of people, but we want to make sure that within your community, within your site, that the information is getting to the right people. So that is that role of that project lead. And then we also understand, because of the uniqueness of this grant, that a lot of the work is K-12, but a significant portion is in the birth through kindergarten entry area, that we do have somebody that's fulfilling that early learning lead. So you would want to ensure that the birth through kindergarten entities are represented through work that aligns with K-12 literacy, that unique literacy needs of this group are addressed, that you need to actively engage in program and funding decisions. Of course, we'll review the funding formula, but there's 15% at that early learning section. And then share responsibility for communication with and requests from DPI. So there will be times where there's work that involves all, and then there's sometimes that work that really is strategic to just that early learning, and it's up to both the project lead and the early learning lead to make sure that is happening at the appropriate levels. And then of course you're going to collaborate also with the implementation consultant. You're also going to respond to federal eval requests. And then finally, for both groups, it's to participate in cohort activities and actively engage in the literacy improvement work.
Continuing with the assurances that were entered on the grant application, Amanda has just been talking quite a bit about the early learning assurance. So this was one thing that you agreed to, that they would be equal partners. You would find them within your community and include them in the literacy work moving forward. Next slide. Okay. The literacy audit is probably the place where your work begins, especially if you have not conducted an audit at your site within the past 2 years. A literacy audit would be something along the lines of a needs assessment. And we know that those of you who came to the workshop and wrote the application are familiar with this. We just want to bring all team members on at this time to be considering that this is the piece that is going to take a look at where your literacy work currently is at your site and identify some areas where you want to focus your work to move forward to serve disadvantaged students. So that literacy audit is one thing that needs to happen if you have not had one recently. Coaching, Amanda opened up with the goals. Literacy coaching and implementation are the hinge pins of this grant. Every site should ensure that they have a plan for coaching throughout the life of the grant and hopefully beyond that will focus on the literacy skills of the staff in the building to best meet the needs of all children and especially to focus on the needs of disadvantaged children. There are different coaching formats that you'll be able to consider. We're not going to go into those details today on the webinar, but know that this is a key piece that needs to be considered in your budgeting and a key piece that needs to begin perhaps with hiring immediately this spring or considerations for, and definitely needs to be a key consideration in your programming. The implementation consultant is the other piece, the other cog that is going to make the plan turn. The regional education agencies are going to be supporting with the implementation consulting. They will be working as a team to design a thorough plan to reach all sites together, and that plan is coming to fruition. What the implementation piece will be is your kind of personal guide throughout this grant implementation, someone to look at your audit with you, someone to discuss your professional development, someone to help keep you on track throughout the work of the grant, kind of to walk alongside you and support you with professional development, but also, and most importantly, just implementing your plans. Another assurance is that your team will engage in continuous improvement. I'm going to point you back to the local literacy team that Amanda was talking about that each site has identified, and how this team is not just on paper, but they should begin immediately with their plan for how they are going to lead the work in their site and bring all team members on board to move the work forward, and then continue to be the people who dig into the audit, who dig into the professional development, and make sure that they're finding ways to share the information out with the team, to include the team in decisions, and just to kind of always be looking at this continuous improvement. Where are we? Where do we need to go? And that all of that, each team member will engage in the work. That's your continuous improvement assurance.
When we talk about moving along with the assurances, family engagement continues to be an area that is continuing to evolve and that we're continuing to learn more about. Obviously, we are right in the middle of a pandemic, which has made convening very challenging and non-existent. And so one of the things that was a requirement is now sort of being adjusted as we continue to not only respond to the needs of the current time, but also just to realize where our expectations are fair and equitable. And so one thing that we want to just highlight is we've always said that districts must utilize state-provided family engagement training. That obviously used to be an in-person convening that was held. There was a date in the spring. There were several sites, both new and current, that were on board with working with Dr. Constantino. And I know that he was planning some trainings coming into different districts and communities. Well, those things are on hold a little bit as we again adapt out of the in-person convenings to virtual. But so Dr. Constantino, with the state dollars and the state expectation, is developing online modules for these trainings. That was always going to be something that was being proposed. Obviously, there is even more of a need for them in this environment. So as information becomes available, we will post that information on the DPI website. We also talked a lot during the workshops about that identifying a measure for studying and reporting family engagement efficacy. And one of the examples that we talked about was something like the Living Tree platform. We have since learned that we're going to even offer more flexibility. And so again, that is something that is evolving, and this is not going to be the last time that we talk about this this assurance. And so we are continually researching best practices in this process. And so please just stay tuned for these types of engagement pieces. If everybody would mute their lines, that would be helpful. Thank you. So one thing that what we knew at the workshops has been adjusted even in the last couple of months. So just please be aware that we will keep you guys up to speed as we learn and know more. The next slide is talking about the another assurance, which is choice literacy activities. Now, this is something, and Brenda's going to and Anne are going to go into deeper conversations. As you know, many of you did not receive exactly what was asked in your application, and we had told you to shoot for the moon, and you all did that. And again, some really difficult decisions had to be made when making some of those cuts. However, as you focus your work and your efforts and you think about the budget, we want you to not forget that we did ask you to propose innovative ways to offer these choice literacy activities outside traditional school models, and to remember to focus on those disadvantaged children. So just when you're making some of those decisions and kind of finalizing your budget, this is still an assurance that you guys wrote, but obviously some things will have to be adjusted in terms of the budgeting and so on. So make sure that you in conversations and in planning, when you're going back to the drawing board and you're making some of those cuts, that you keep these things in mind, but also you do recognize that you do want to do some of those choice activities. It's just going to be maybe being a little bit more strategic and innovative in the way that we budget for those. So finally, talking, not finally, but another piece is within the literacy plan. And when we talk about the literacy plan, we did take a quite a lengthy time within the workshops to get you familiar with the North Dakota State comprehensive literacy plan. We would ask you to continue to use that as your guide. We will be constantly building and growing that tool. But along the way, we want you guys to have your own local literacy plan as well. And so just make sure that that is something that you constantly go back to as you're looking at your grant application and your budget. And then finally, the final assurances is your evaluation participation, and you agreed that you would participate in state and federal evaluation and reporting processes. And we are all living in the unknown right now, what that looks like with GEPRA requirements, which is reporting your state assessment results to the federal government. Obviously, we are operating under an accountability waiver, and the state assessment, the NDSA, this year was open. The window was open for 1 day, and then the schools were shut down until further notice. So we're going to have to think about what that looks like. But in the future, yes, you will have those GEPRA requirements. And then we are utilizing a state continuous improvement tool, another ongoing request, as we focus what Brenda was talking about with that continuous improvement expectations. So we want that to be front and center when you're making decisions. And that kind of concludes the assurances, which leads you right directly into the budget.
Thanks, Amanda. Okay, so we will begin talking about the budget and the budget considerations that need to be made for managing this grant. As you were preparing the grant and reviewing the guidance and regulations, you'll know that there are some complex budgeting prioritizations and requirements that must be implemented. You'll see on the screen that these requirements we've outlined, that birth through kindergarten entry, you must utilize 15% of your total budget for the year. Kindergarten through grade 5 or 6, 40%. Middle school, 20%. High school, 20%. And then administrative costs at 5%. So a couple pieces to clarify. In some school systems, elementary school is K through 4 or K through 5. Your district will need to work out kind of some of these uniquenesses with Brenda Ermintrout on articulating what defines our elementary school and what will that budget total be, what defines our middle school, high school, so forth. Now, your administrative costs includes your indirect cost rate. So districts have the ability to apply to the department to receive an indirect cost rate. Let's say that your indirect cost rate is 2%. In a traditional setting, you would be able to apply 2% of your regular budget towards indirect costs and indirect expenses. In the comprehensive literacy grant, that is assumed within that 5% cost. So you can claim 5% administrative costs that would benefit the entire birth through grade 12 system. Or you could claim your 2% indirect cost rate, which would be a flat rate payment, plus then 3% that would be budgeted birth through grade 12. Please note that there is no flexibility to spend funds outside of one grade band and into another. What we've noticed with striving readers is that there are certain grade bands that might be more challenging to implement. And let's say that for your community would be your high school implementation. But elementary could really use more money. Can we use our high school funds for the elementary? The answer to that is no. This is a system-wide grant, and we're working towards systems level improvement. So the funds will need to be spent in the buckets that they're identified. If, let's say, that elementary implementation is going slow and you'll need to carry funds over, when you report or when you expend down your funds, they'll be tagged as elementary and they would be carried over from year to year in that elementary bucket. If you do not have your business manager on this call, I would highly recommend that you get your business manager a copy of this recording. Also, business managers are encouraged to reach out to striving readers districts that had the grant prior on how to set up their accounting budgets, as this is a key piece to implementation. On the next slide, we'll talk briefly about the administrative use of funds, and I did talk about it a little bit. But that 5% administrative is really used for administering the grant. So those district level costs for administration. It might be someone with the budgeting office, or it might be birth through grade 12 professional development, or the coaching salary, or a coordinator salary if they're serving birth through grade 5 coaching or coordination. So there are some allowable uses, and the indirect cost, as I mentioned, is one of those. It's important to note that your indirect cost rate is within that 5%. If you have an indirect cost rate, let's say of 8%, your cap is here at 5%, and 8% of cost for indirect costs would not be allowable. And then, as it was also mentioned, it needs to be for system-wide expenses. Saw a question pop up in the chat box, and this next slide will help address that. It would have been noted in your grant award memo as well that the CLSD funds must be tracked separately, and they must be tracked at those 5 levels: the district, birth through 5, elementary, middle, and secondary level. You'll notice the revenue code for these funds is 4535, and then you'll also notice the following codes, the project and program codes that you'll be using for this grant. Brenda, can you please clarify? I see the slide says circle NDSRCL. Is that CLSD?
Yeah,
4535 CLSD.
Apologize. Yes, I checked on that, and it will be the same code for CLSD.
Okay, so the money coming in is going to be 4535, and then you use the chart here for your expenses going out. Thank you, Brenda. So, looking at the budget request that must be submitted, with Striving Readers, we had implemented required requests for funds that must be done on a quarterly basis. The target dates are outlined on your screen: September 30th, December 31st, March 31st, and June 30th. You will be submitting the request for funds or expenditures within our web grant system. With every request, you'll submit a detailed ledger that shows that age or grade band expenditure, and it is based on a quarterly basis. Now, and it's also based on reimbursement of funds. It's federal funds, so they're for reimbursement. Now, it's a minimum that these are submitted quarterly. You could submit them more often. You could submit them monthly if you chose, but it's a minimum that they're submitted quarterly. The quarterly request for funds also gives us an idea at the department on implementation. What is being implemented, who has been hired, how often are people working and meeting. And so meeting those quarterly drawdowns, it is imperative. North Dakota receiving this giant grant from the federal government it's also imperative that we have action moving forward and that we are implementing off of this grant. So it is imperative that you meet these deadlines. Failure to meet these deadlines could potentially put your district's grant in jeopardy, especially if it is recognized through monitoring and technical assistance that it is not being implemented. Federal use of funds. So federal funds are used and requested on a reimbursement basis. So you cannot prepay for something. Let's say that you have a contractor that's going to be providing some professional development on tier 1 supports. We can't pay for that or be reimbursed for that expense until that actual event had occurred. So keep in mind, it's always on a reimbursement basis. Annually, the literacy coordinator and manager will submit a budget for approval on the web grant system. That budget will be reviewed by department staff and go back and forth until it gets into an approvable format. The local business manager, in conjunction with the program manager, will submit their requests for funds in that detailed ledger at a minimum on a quarterly basis. The ledger's reviewed compared to your approved budget. If there's items that are listed that are not approved or that need more clarification, we will be in contact with you. Now, there is the opportunity to make amendments or budget revisions through the web grant system. It's important to know that any amendments must be approved before you plan on implementing. So let's say that a district moves forward and purchases something but did not have approval. The district then does run the risk that that is a non-reimbursable expense of the grant, and then they would be responsible for covering that item locally. We will say that this situation has occurred with Striving Readers, so we do highly encourage your program manager and business manager to work with the department so it does not run the risk of making expenses or payments that have not officially been approved. For those of you familiar with federal funds, you're also familiar with supplement, not supplant requirements. This is a requirement of the comprehensive literacy funding. So these funds cannot be used to supplant those local or state funds that currently exist or those roles that exist. An example that I'll provide is that the state statute requires that I'm blanking the name, that a specialist be hired for a strategist. I believe it's called a strategist be hired for grades K through 3. And that strategist can be doing instructional coaching. A district could not use the literacy funding to pay for that strategist, as that strategist funding is already being provided through your state aid formula, and it is in statute that it must be in place. So you must be familiar with what's in statute regarding literacy, standards, curriculum, what's your local district responsibility. And these literacy funds are for those activities that are above and beyond what locally you must provide or based on state statute that you must provide. There's some key budget considerations that Brenda did address a little bit earlier in the audit, and I'll ask her to kind of walk through each of these budget considerations right here on the slide as well.
You bet. I've just relisted the key items here, mainly because I read through all of your budgets that you submitted with your applications, and there were so many exciting and wonderful ideas, and mixed in there were the key items that we need to cover, as well as some other wishful items. So I wanted to take this opportunity to point you back to the key goals of the grant, which are coaching and implementation, and the key assurances that you agreed to. So as I said, you must have a literacy audit to inform the work that's coming up over the next 5 years. You must attend to literacy coaching at your site. It's going to look a little different at each site, but you do need to consider that in your budgeting. You also need to consider that PD specific to literacy is going to be a big part of this grant. We are focused on improving our tier 1 approaches, and that's going to take some professional development. So that's a key as well. Family engagement and choice literacy approaches, you'll remember Amanda talked about them a little bit earlier in this presentation. We went through them. For those of you who wrote the grant, you know about these items. I want to make all entities on your team aware that these are pieces that need to show up in your. You do have to focus on family engagement and some choice literacy activities. Are you going to be able to do them to the extent that you proposed in your application? That is for you to decide when you look at your funding, you look at your grade band allowances, and figure out which activities come after you've figured out your core approach in coaching and professional development. And then also, because we're making you start with a literacy audit, it's highly recommended that you reserve some funds in the unobligated category 900 so that you can respond to that audit. And that may be your professional development that you're looking at. You might not know yet where you want to focus that. So I wanted to assure you that in this case, it's fine for now to have some unobligated funds as we're going into the grant. You're going to be filling out your budget for year 1, and I would expect to see some uncertainty or some unclarity in that area as you begin the work. So these are the key things I wanted you thinking about at the beginning.
Thank you, Brenda. I also noticed that there's a few questions that are coming in, and just so the group is aware, we will be recording those questions and coming out with written guidance specific to them. One question is about the use of funds or the use of codes between Circle and CLSD. Yes, they're very similar, but there is a slight difference in especially those expenditure codes, especially if you are a Circle district and a CLSD district. Those funds need to be tracked separately.
Yep, and the letters we sent out last week have those codes printed on them too if you need a quick reference, but we'll definitely get those out to you again and again, as many times as you need to ask.
There will also be additional guidance provided on how do we go about accessing information in the web grant system. Is there a specific access that we need to be given or be granted to look at our grant and move forward? That information will be coming as well. And then allowable carryover. I could have sworn it was in my notes and I must have looked over the top of it. But yes, there is carryover allowed with this grant. Just like with striving readers, there is not a minimum or a maximum. However, if there is substantial carryover, that pretty much means that there is not implementation happening. If there's substantial carryover, and we're talking 40, 50% of your grant, there will be high levels of scrutiny regarding the implementation. And if we're not implementing the grant, then again, as I mentioned earlier, we risk the fact that we could lose that grant. So again, there is not specific mins or maxes at this time, but all grantees are expected to implement what was written within their grant application. So a few notes on the budget application items. And this is in review to the first set of applications that we reviewed, or that sets of applications that we reviewed. The main purpose, as Brenda had mentioned, and the main personnel in this grant is coaching. So coaches at the variety of levels. Now, some sites budgeted for coordinators, and a coordinator may be allowable, or a part-time of their coordination might be allowable, but that is based on the size of the grant and what one would be able to justify. Intervention staff, so think of tier 2, tier 3 supports. That is not the primary focus of these funds. These funds are for tier 1 supports and coaching supports. Auxiliary staff such as data analysis, business office support, they are not the primary use of funds. What I will say is it could be an allowable use of a district's indirect cost rate to have business office expenses or data collection expenses charged to that indirect cost, but not as core FTE within the grant. So as you're developing your budget application that you'll be entering in the more detailed budget application that you'll be entering into the web grant system, keep these elements in mind, as the primary personnel support will really need to revolve around coaching supports. So moving to the next slide, there's also some budget considerations that must be addressed. So core curriculum is not allowed. If a district wants to purchase a new reading series for the middle and high school, that is not an allowable expense. That would actually be supplanting, a supplanting violation. So core curriculum is the responsibility of the local district and must not be used out of these federal funds. Now, let's say that you do purchase that core curriculum and want the professional development to go along with that the professional development could be an allowable use of funds, but that actual core curriculum could not. A change between striving readers and this grant is the intervention materials. Striving readers really focused on that tier 2 of an RTI model, where this grant focuses on tier 1. So intervention materials or software or supports or staff for intervention, that is not the intended use of this grant. The intended use of this grant will be for tier 1 supports for those in particular disadvantaged students, and helping all teachers to become better instructors to meeting all students' needs. There may be some results out of a district's literacy audit or local needs assessment that focuses on disadvantaged students and a potential intervention that might be needed for that. And those will be handled on a case-by-case basis, considering, though, the overall scope of what else is budgeted and what else is needed within that grant. Supporting materials for literacy, such as bookshelves, storage units, so forth. That is not the primary focus of this grant again. The only time that something like that would be approved was if it was situational and then justified as the broader linkage to that tier 1 support through the budgeting process. Again, similarly, iPads, laptops, recording devices are not a primary focus of this funding source. I will put a plug in there that each district is receiving a CARES Act relief grant, or will be receiving a CARES Act relief grant that allows for a lot of broad flexibility in the use of funds. Although the comprehensive literacy grant is not, its sole purpose is not for these technology pieces. You could look at other federal funds to help support that initiative in your school, but that's just not the purpose of this funding source. Family engagement is a huge element of the grant, and some sites will apply for family night supplies. Those have to be reviewed very, very closely and must be submitted for approval before purchasing. So if that is a core element of your budgeting expectations, make sure that you submit that information for us to review before implementing. Incentives for students, incentives for family night, those are not allowed and not supported. They are not based on evidence-based practices. So purchasing items through another funding source would be encouraged, but not with this funding source. So if you're going to have that family night and a couple bicycles are going to be given to families that attend, that would not be an allowable use of this funds. You'd need to find an outside funding source for that incentive. Now, this is a literacy grant, but books are a gray area. So could books be allowable? They could be justified, in particular if it is something that is found through your needs assessment and audit, but it's really approved on a situational basis. The purpose of this grant is not to infuse a bunch of books into your library. The purpose of this grant is to build tier 1 instructional support so our educators are better equipped to address the needs of all kids in all classrooms. Go back to one slide. If you are going to be implementing and would like to explore looking at books, the district and site must really have a solid plan on how this is going to be evidence-based and how it will track the implementation to determine the impact that it has on your grant. Now, with all federal funds.
And this is Brenda. Can I
Yes.
just pop in a note there? The question about books, if you're confused about that and you have an idea, I'm the gal to call. Just call me up and we'll talk through what your idea is, and we'll talk about where the line is for evidence-based and how your project might work. So don't let that scare you off, but do know that there's a conversation there that should happen with us.
And I also see a question about PD books. So if you're doing a book study with all staff, that would be professional development, and that could be allowable. If the funding were used just to build a professional development library with not a targeted approach to literacy, that would probably not be a justified use. So PD for book studies with all staff or targeted staff could be an allowable use for professional development. Federal guidelines are very clear on food and beverage expenses. For the most part, if you're traveling specific to comprehensive literacy work, so maybe travel that takes you to North Dakota, travel that takes you to a literacy conference, your meals can be reimbursable to your local grant. But providing meals or beverages at staff meetings or parent events and so forth, they are rarely approved. It is very clear in that federal guidance that this is not a situation or appropriate use of federal funds. In order to see if it's approvable or if that there might be an exception, you need to reach out to Brenda Ermentrout and build that case. Because those federal guidelines must be adhered to. The expenses, if they are incurred, must be reasonable and justified.
Right, I'm going to take a little bit of time to cover the Web Grants Management System, access and use. I know some of you out there have already used the system, especially if you are on the application team and you submitted the application. It's the very system that I'm talking about next. We continue to use it throughout the life of the grant. Just to touch base on the application review scores, I know some of you have asked me about that. Those are being made available to you now. As we learn the new system, it's a new lesson, every single thing that we need to do. So I'm halfway there with posting those review scores, and I hope to have them out in the next couple of days so that you can see what the reviewers had to say about your applications. You addressed access and users on the Web Grant Management System. Anyone can apply to be a user on the Web Grant System, but the district decides which pieces, which grants within that system certain people have access to. So although 3 or 4 of you may have applied during the application process and may have been working on the grant, it's up to the district administration to decide who is going to have access to the actual funding work after that. And that is on a grant by grant basis. So you may be allowed to work within one grant, but you may not have any access to another grant within your district. So that is a local decision. The business manager should be the lead person, I would think, that, or one important person that would have access, because they'll need to use the system to request reimbursement funds and also to submit amendments. It's possible that a program coordinator would have access. The main reason would be to be able to see what's happening with the funds in there and also to submit amendments, but that work can all be done through the business manager if necessary. An administrator, a superintendent may be the one who wants to have a final sign off and submission rights. So that is something that you will need to decide at your site and determine. And you can do that online. You can offer permissions, you can deny permissions from different people. If you need help with that, you can contact me and I can help you figure out how to set up your access. Formerly, you would have been awarded a grant award. It would have come electronically as an email, but now it will be offered through the system, and it's called a contract. So that language has changed, and you will be getting your contracts shortly. We are finishing up the details within the system so that everything you need is there for you. Those contracts will have to be returned by your person who is your signator and has the ability to sign for them. So you'll want to make sure that person has access to the grant. The budget will be entered into the Web Grant system. So if you are part of the application process and you built the cost chart into the system, it's going to be a very similar process. You will have drop-down boxes, you will have numbers that you enter. It will look just like the pieces that you have to enter are the same as the old budget system. You have to enter a justification or what would have been called a narrative. And so you will want to enter, you'll be entering those pieces on the system. It's a little challenging to describe on a webinar what to do, but when you get in the system and you start working through it, that's when you see the pieces. We can offer training for anyone who needs to learn the system. Just reach out to me and I'll set up that tutoring for you to get you started on it. It's kind of, we're halfway there, so it's hard to know who needs access and who needs training right now. So I'm your link for that. Just let me know what you need and I'll help you learn it.
And I don't mean to interrupt, Brenda, but we are at the noon mark and we understand that if you have to jump off, please feel free to jump off. We are recording this and so you can review the recording for the last, I would say there's about 5 minutes remaining. And so just be aware that you can view the recording later if you have to exit, but we do want to finish up some important information.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. It's nice to be aware of that. Eventually, we will do reports on the system, such as quarterly reports or site visit reports or any of those kinds of things. And we'll train you up and let you know about that as that comes. That would be more of your program coordinators and your project leads that would be working with those. Requests for funds and amendments, which you would know formerly as budget revisions if you haven't been working in the new system yet, those will be done through the system as well. Next slide, please. This is a little taste of what it will look like while you're building your budget online. You will have a budget for each of your categories. This one happens to be an elementary budget screenshot. You can see that each of the object codes are there, so you'll get to determine how much money you want to put in there. And then the line below that says justification is where you'll explain what you want to spend that on. You'll enter your information into the budget once your contracts are released to you. So this is not available to you quite yet. Your CLSD awards are still being created in the system, and it will still be a few more days before those come out to you. And then once it's available, you can go in and build your budget and submit it. On our end, we'll go through and read what you have for your justification items. This is where to describe each of the things that you want to spend money on. And then we'll be able to negotiate back to you if we have more questions until we get to a confirmed budget. With your follow-up memo, you will be getting a breakdown chart that tells you how much money out of your total year one award is your 15% for your birth through kindergarten entry, how much is your elementary percent of 40. You can do those numbers, but sometimes those pennies really get in the way. So we'll send you a chart with the exact number that you should make your total come up to. That will be coming to you, and you'll need that for your work within the system here. All right, next slide. As far as the budget approval timelines, like I said, those will be opened up to you in the next few days to get going. But I know some of you are very eager. You've been thinking about this for a long time. You want to start hiring. You want to get some PD on the schedule. If you have some urgent items, please just reach out to me and say, I need to be a priority, because I know that not all of you are in that position. Some of you are going to need a little bit of time to work on this budget and think it through. So my outside goal is that we have all approvals done by June 1st. But if you are ready to go, I think we can get that done in as quickly as about 7 to 10 days. So let's just keep me apprised of what your urgencies are. And I will try to respond back to you. Right, just a few state and federal requirements. Next slide. We've already mentioned so many of these, but things that we'll be asking you about along the way, and we'll get you more detail because I know we're short on time, is you will have annual reporting and some ongoing communication with us. From the federal level, you may be asked to answer some surveys and to provide some information for federal evaluations. We do have an annual convening requirement, but as we all know, whether we do those face-to-face or move to virtual format, will be currently we're kind of hoping for 21st in Bismarck face-to-face for that annual convening, and that would include team leads, early learning leads, and some other key people that we know more about later on. We would like to do site visits. Again, all this information is going to be developing as you all know, as our virtual plans and our on-site plans continue together in the state. And then you will be required to work with your implementation consultant with appointments and the things that they ask about as well. All right, the main contacts, myself, Brenda Ermentrout, Ann Ellefson. Carolyn Kieber is the Head Start collaborator, and she did not have a voice on this webinar today, but she's a great contact for your birth through kindergarten entry age questions. And then Jane is our support staff and our fiscal officer. She can also be reached with questions, and she can get them to the right person as well. Next slide. We'll continue to offer you support through the different things that we've mentioned, professional development. Your REAs are going to be main supports for you. Our Literacy Coaching Academy, there will be more information to come on that. And then just direct one-on-one to support. You can always call or email me with questions. Please expect a follow-up memo and this slide deck and eventually the webinar video. And we will be answering questions in a follow-up format through that memo or through individual calls. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in there today and joining us. And welcome to the grant team. Have a great day.